Welcome to Corwin's Teacher to Teacher podcast with host Carol Pelletier Radford. Carol is an experienced classroom teacher, university educator, founder of mentoringinaction.com, and author of 4 best-selling professional books for teachers. She believes the best form of professional learning happens when teachers engage in authentic conversations and share their wisdom. In every episode, Carol and her guests share stories about pivotal moments in their careers, successful classroom strategies, and personal actions they take to minimize stress and stay healthy. The Teacher to Teacher podcast is a place to engage in authentic conversation and reflection with experienced educators. We hope these conversations will energize you, keep you inspired, and remind you why you chose to become a teacher.
Hello, and welcome to the Teacher to Teacher podcast. I'm Liz Gilday, Senior Acquisitions Editor here at Corwin. This season of the podcast focuses on mentoring in action. We have such a rich episode for you today, centered around the topic of reflection in action, listening to our inner voice. Our guests are Joe Schmidt and Laura Garrison-Brook. Joe speaks about his journey from beginning social studies educator to leading a national organization. He's also the author of 2 excellent books from Corwin, Civil Discourse, Classroom Conversations for Stronger Communities, and his second book, The Social Studies Field Guide, Strategies and Tools to Captivate Students, Cultivate Critical Thinking, and Create Engaged Citizens. Laura is the founder of a nonprofit, Discovering My Purpose, that uses evidence-based concepts to help young people connect with their purpose. She brings a positive psychology lens to the discussion today. I love how this conversation focuses on the need for intentionality, both in being a mentor and in being a mentee. Carol, Laura, and Joe share unexpected ideas, tools, and tips to make mentorship relationships and reflection both positive and productive. They dive into how reflection requires both curiosity and courage, and how to make it a habit that is built into your life and practice. I hope you enjoy this insightful conversation as much as I did.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carol Pelletier Radford, and this is the Teacher to Teacher podcast, season 4. And the theme for this season is mentoring in action, because that's how most teachers are all day long. They're in action and they're helping beginners, and beginners are in action, full-time teaching. The episode today is one that I think is really important that we often don't take time to talk about. And this is called Reflection in Action, Listening to Our Inner Voice. And it's about that, taking time to just stop, regroup, and move forward again in a clear way, in a more intentional way. And as teachers, and those of you who are listening to this podcast, that isn't always something that we say we have the luxury of time to do. So our guests, my guests today, Joe and Laura, are going to engage in the conversation with me. And hopefully you'll all be inspired to spend a little bit more time reflecting before just moving on to the next big idea. So welcome, Joe. Welcome, Laura. Thank you for saying yes to be on the show. I'm going to have each of you introduce yourself to the audience, and then we're going to get started with some questions. So, Joe.
Yeah, hello. Welcome, listeners. So excited to be here. My name is Joe Schmidt. I'm the co-author of 2 books from Corwin Publishing. One, Civil Discourse, Classroom Conversations for Stronger Communities, and the newest book recently out this spring, The Social Studies Field Guide. I am a social studies nerd. I work as an author, speaker, consultant. I'm currently transitioning from vice president to president-elect of the National Council for the Social Studies. If you're a social studies educator listening to this, please take a look if you're not a member. I also serve in a variety of other capacities with civic ed organizations across the country, including as Senior Director of Teacher Programs for the Bill of Rights Institute.
Oh my God. Whoa. That's a lot. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I don't know. I'm glad you could fit us in. You're doing so much, Joe, and I'm very excited to read your new book. Laura, welcome. Let's hear your background and how you are contributing to the world at large.
Oh, thank you so much, Carol, and thanks for the invitation to be here. It's truly my pleasure because Carol and I have known each other for years, which is so fun. We actually met randomly because I am a yoga teacher. I've been teaching for about 20 years, and Carol was in my class on an app called Insight Timer. So that's how we got connected. And I mentioned to her, and I mentioned to the students at large in one of our my classes quite a few years ago, that I work in positive education as well, because I'm really passionate about helping young people flourish. And I put out that call saying, hey, is there anyone who's also in this space? Because I'd love to talk to you. And Carol, of course, immediately stepped forward and was just such a great contributor to both my nonprofit organization, which is called Discovering My Purpose, and to another nonprofit organization that I helped co-found called the Positive Education Consortium. So I'm a positive psychology practitioner, and positive psychology is the science of how we thrive. And my nonprofit organization has a program which focuses on evidence-based concepts to help young people connect to their strengths, what they love to do, and what they feel the world needs so that they just live happier, more meaningful lives. I also recently got my master's from the University of Pennsylvania in applied positive psychology, and I'm just really grateful to have these tools in order to be of service to young people.
And I think your work, and the more I delved into it and got to know you about the positive psychology, I embraced the PERMA plus principles that you introduced me to Marty Seligman's work, and how that work really has fulfilled this mentoring work that I've done. It's added to it and really helped to frame the interactions that we have with each other as mentors and mentees, but mentors with their own students, and because we're all in this together. And mentoring in action is the community of the students, the teachers, the mentors. We're not in little silos. We really do connect. And what you're bringing up, Laura and Joe, who you are and all that you're doing, clearly supports the idea of us mentoring each other where we are at this stage. It isn't just mentoring the novices. I take this conversation that we're going to have today as a mentoring conversation for school leaders, for the three of us, as we decide how we are going to move forward. So thank you. So before we get into the topic, which is reflection and action, listening to our inner voice, I want each of you to share a story that shows us and our listeners how important mentoring is to individual real people, that it isn't just a theory that's a good idea. It actually is part of our lives. Joe, are you up for sharing something?
Sure, absolutely. As I mentioned in my introduction, currently serving on the NCSS Board of Directors, transitioning to president role with that organization, or president-elect. But it's an interesting path that got me there, right? So it's this National Social Studies organization. When I was a first-year teacher in rural northern Wisconsin, I was assigned a mentor, a formal mentor, amazing human being, a Spanish teacher, like 3 halls down, and she had to have regular meetings with me and help me understand different policies, or how to use the copier code, or all those different types of stuff. And she did exactly what that role was supposed to do, right? It was a kind of a district assigned, compensated, I'm sure it was a small compensation, but compensation for doing that. But next door to me, there was another teacher. So I was in the social studies department. Next door was the social studies teacher, Deb Foster. And Deb and I would talk in the hallways. And she was, an informal mentor there as a first year teacher. She was happy to have conversations. And just very coincidentally enough, she was serving on the board for the Wisconsin Council for the Social Studies. And we had connected because my methods professor in college was a past president of the Wisconsin Council for the Social Studies. And she let me know that the Wisconsin Council was looking for proposals to present at their the spring conference the first year that I was a teacher. And she said, we should co-present together. And I was like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. She's like, that's fine. I'll help you through this. So we put together a session. She kind of asked, what I was teaching. I had a couple, a sociology class that I was teaching both first semester and second semester. So I get 2 tries to try it out. And as we got closer and closer in the spring, I was like, Deb, do we need to get together and plan this, or what's? She's like, no, you've got this. I'll just be there. I'll just be there. You do. And then, like, as we got closer and closer, it became more and more apparent Deb was gonna do less and less, and then just watch. And at first, part of me is like, I can't do this on my own, but she was very clear. Yes, you could, right? Like, she didn't have things that's, what she'd say. I don't have things to contribute to that. That's a great lesson. That's a great understanding. More teachers need to hear that. More teachers need to be involved in that type of work. So by the time spring of my first year came along, I was kind of co-presenting, I guess, but just presenting by myself at the front of the classroom. And it did start. That was the first time I'd attended the Wisconsin Council for the Social Studies Conference. Deb introduced me to people on their board of directors. When I changed schools a couple years later, I was in a different region that had an opening that I was able to run for the board. I ran for the board. I was elected. I eventually became vice president of the organization, business manager, and I had this very clear through line where I look at myself now. It's like, okay, July 1st, 2026, I'll be president of NCSS, but I can almost clearly point it back to being out in the hallway with Deb Foster, and she's like, we should co-present together. But turns out, yeah, the professional joke was on me, because in the end, she had convinced me that I was able to present all by myself.
She saw that in you and instilled that confidence. And you're really bringing up an important point that is worthy of underscoring. Novice teachers don't have to wait for 10 years to earn teacher leadership role. As a beginning teacher, when a mentor or a colleague sees that enthusiasm, energy, competence, there is a lot of competence, and beginning teachers have competence. Sometimes I don't have the confidence. And what a wonderful story. I just can see the full circle. And now I'm going to ask you something. Are you mentoring some beginning teachers to present at the conference now as the new incoming president? Is that going to be part of your door opening?
That's always part of our thing, going out there and getting people. I can actually say my first National Council for the Social Studies session was a session geared towards helping pre-service educators. It's something that we had started doing in Wisconsin, where we did a session where pre-service educators could come in and we do some mock interviews, we do some resume reviews and help with that. And I feel like I've always been very blessed. I've told this story so many times that, right, like, I lucked out having Deb Foster next to me, Jesse Bradley in my second school, and I do feel a deep need to give back to helping those teachers, and that's one of the reasons that kind of led me into this role now. I do my full-time job. I do professional development across the country, and there's a need right now for young educators coming into the profession, and that makes me happy every day, to just the ability to help teachers find their voice in their classroom, whether that's a veteran teacher who's learned something a little new, but oftentimes it's the teacher who comes in and is just like, oh my gosh, I can do that tomorrow, because there's a good chance they didn't really have much of a plan for tomorrow, because teaching is so hard, especially those first 3 years. I've taught elementary methods, and I tell my methods kids, like, those first 3 years, you're gonna feel like you're drowning, and that's okay. Don't let that panic you. I felt the same way for 3 years, thinking I was never going to be any good at this. I was never going to be able to do this. And I think just by helping, the pre-service educator or those new to career educators understand, there was a time in my life I didn't have it all together. I panicked every day. I worried every day. And luckily there were people there to help me along.
Exactly. I think the mid-career teachers, both of my sons are teachers in their mid-career, and I'm feeling like we need to create some mid-career mentoring streams or strands because my focus has always been on the early career too, and the 3 year, and we've got to keep you. And some people are leaving before they even get started because they're not getting the advice that you were just giving that, come on, it does get easier and we do learn more. But I feel like the mid-career, my sons are they're looking for that peer mentoring or that change. So I don't know if any other new books are in either of you. Mid-career mentoring might be one of them. Laura, reaction to Joe, and then I'd love to hear a mentoring story from you. What did you hear in Joe's story?
And definitely the inspiration of, the fact that Joe, you soaked up the mentoring where it was offered. It sounds like, Deb being right next door, that's what really landed with you, her seeing in you what you didn't yet see in yourself. That to me really landed.
Right. And I think it's important. We do need both. We need the formal mentoring program because there are other types of things. But I love what you just said, Laura, about soaking it up. It's like there isn't just one mentor in a school, they're everywhere. Every teacher potentially is a mentor for all of us, and not just early career teachers. Like all of us can learn from each other. So what's your story, Laura? What has that an impact on you in the
Mm.
mentoring realm?
Yeah, well, thank you, Carol. And my story is actually my very first brush with mentoring. So I was invited to create a mentor program, and as part of that mentor program, I would gather mentors together for them to connect with each other and talk about, hey, what's going well, what conversations have really landed with their mentees. And being the facilitator of these, what I would consistently hear, because I ran this for a few years, is the mentors coming in with this expectation of, as a mentor, I'm going to be giving. This is about me giving my expertise. This is about giving my knowledge. And they would then come together and be really surprised by how much they got. And what's beautiful about, your theme for today, Carol, is reflection in action, is the mentors, by virtue of sharing their wisdom with others, they had to get clear, like, okay, this is why I do this. This is, how I do this. And that's where there was a lot of learnings that they had, because in order to share that with someone, you got to get clear on it yourself. And it was really amazing for me to be the witness to these mentors having this tremendous shift where they went into this thinking, I'm going to be giving of myself, and then all of a sudden they're like, wow, I'm getting just as much as I'm giving. And that was really powerful.
Research does um, agree with that. I've
Hmm.
read that and I've heard that a number of times. What did
Hmm.
it feel like to be in the presence of that? Because you were the leader of it. And I
Hmm.
also truly believe in mentors getting together. A lot of
Yes.
programs don't bring the mentors together.
Hmm.
I love that. Monthly meetings for mentors, and that's kind of my whole shtick. But so many programs don't do it to help mentors prepare for the mentoring role. What did you also see in just bringing them as a group together?
Well, it's honestly one of my favorite things in life is to help people unlock their potential. So, being in that role of helping these mentors come to a deeper understanding of who they are and and how they can be of service, that was really gratifying. And the other thing that felt really powerful about the experience is I could see that it shifted them into a different gear when it came down to mentoring, because it felt much more sustainable. Here the mentors are thinking again that this is going to be about me being of service, which in itself can be powerful.
Right.
But instead, it became this recognition that, I'm receiving, value as well. And it became much more co-creative, the relationship between the mentor and the mentee.
More.
And it was beautiful to just be part of helping stitch those relationships together.
I want to talk a little bit about, and I want Joe to react to what Laura just said about this reflection to get clarity. So
Mm,
I'm hearing what you were doing is bringing them
mm,
together. And I don't think it just happened by accident that you create some kind of program where the mentor has to step back and actually think about how they're coaching. So in Joe's story, his side by side mentor, his informal mentor, was slowly stepping back on purpose. She didn't do it just without thinking.
mm,
There's reflection. We don't always capture the reflection. Like we can't grab it. It's like air. It's like we intuitively hear our inner voice and we do something, but we don't even know if we don't stop and say, "Oh wow, I'm thinking this through. I'm going to mentor with and get some clarity about what I'm doing next step instead of always shooting from the hip," which
mm.
teachers can do if we get too busy. We don't do that pause.
Yeah.
Joe, reaction to Laura's story or what I just said about mentoring, and we're kind of diving into the reflection a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, what it made me was thinking about is that in that intentionality of mentoring is such a two-way street. Um, and I've spent time recently, Carol, you were asking about like with the conference, I have it, asking us all teachers. I've made a point to find mentors younger than me or newer to the career than me, but it was an intentional act, right? Thinking about what Laura was saying, that wasn't the first thing I thought of when I got involved with mentoring. It was well, I can help. And then I was helping some people and I was like, oh my gosh, I am a better teacher for having heard them reflect on their practice. And then even then I felt it took years for me to give myself permission to actively seek out traditionally mentors are older than you or they have more experience than you and they're supposed to lead the way. But how do I find people who are in the same space that I am, that I admire, and who are people newer to the career, who is in that, maybe mid-career, Carol, as you were talking about earlier, 5 years in, 7 years in, 10 years in. I think there's some really special educators who do really good things and don't become administrators, or they don't leave the classroom, they don't go into other stuff. And how do you harness their knowledge? Well, I think some of that is mentoring them and being open back. Like there is so much to learn. And I think that that's really important for anybody who's even thinking they're like asking, am I an informal mentor this person? Chances are the answer is yes. And then what you should also do is start to think about, well, what am I learning from them every time I'm having a conversation? Because I feel like I'm a better educator and I've learned so much just by being in the same room of people who took the time to ask for help, right? Those people who ask for help are already showing some sort of awareness, gift of understanding, and they probably have something to give back. So we just have to be, we say, open to receiving it. I think it's a great line.
I love that. Oh God, you've just said so many things. I want to tap into the younger mentor thing because I have a story about that. So I was just at the recently, maybe 8 months ago, International Mentoring Association conference. And of course, it's a mentoring conference. So everyone is saying what you're saying, find a mentor. We're all saying find a mentor. And I'm looking around, I'm like, geez, I'm one of the oldest people here. And I'm looking around for some mentors and I'm thinking, well, who am I going to have help me? Because I do like to learn. I agree with what you're saying, Joe, from anybody. And I realized I was looking in the wrong direction. The last session of the panel, there was this young 23-year-old, young, brilliant woman from Pittsburgh sharing these great ideas about how to share educational things. She wasn't a teacher. She was a mentor in a student-based organization. And I realized, just like you said, I'm looking in the wrong direction. I need to be looking for someone younger. And Emma, and long story short, Emma and I just had a call the other day. She laughed because I went over to her and I said, "Would you be my mentor?" And she immediately said, "Yes." Of course, we're at a mentoring conference. And she has helped me look at the way I present my work in totally new ways that have shifted the way in which my mentoring has been put out. So I want to underscore that for all the people listening to this conversation. We can look in different directions. It doesn't always have to be an older person to mentor. Laura, reaction to Joe or me or any of this ways in which we reflect and learn from each other from younger mentors?
And thank you. Yes. So this being reflective feels really important here. And this is something, even before we got started in this conversation, I was thinking about this as a possible opportunity for conversation, that we can, as I shared in my story around how mentors felt like, okay, this is what mentoring is, and they were almost boxed in. A mentor is about me being the expert, sharing my knowledge with the mentee, when in actuality, it's much bigger than that. So really, coming into this place of, taking a broader view, being more open-minded. Carol, what you shared about, with mentors sharing the curricula with their mentees, about how that just creates a more like even footing, between those who are guiding and those who are being guided. So the invitation is, as with this prompt of reflection, asking yourself, what biases, have I been coming into mentoring with? Like, and I think it's extremely normal for us to be like, oh, a mentor should be quote unquote older. A mentor should be quote unquote, in my same discipline, et cetera, when in actuality, very often diversity brings richness. It brings opportunity for learning. So I think that that's something, that would be a great thing for us to reflect upon as we explore our
Right.
relationship to mentoring.
And I know that when Joe shared his original story, the assigned mentor was not in his content area. So I always think of content mentors and pedagogy mentors.
Mm.
So the side-by-side mentor was more of a pedagogy, but she was in the content area. And that relates to us having more than one mentor. Like we get to decide the people, if we're open to that co-creation. So how can we help the listeners and ourselves be more intentional, like Joe said, with our reflection? Because I know when I talk with mentors and novice teachers and I say, okay, now we're going to reflect, the first answer is, I don't have time. That's usually the blanket. I don't have time to reflect, because if I reflect, I have to stop moving at 100 miles an hour, doing all the things that I'm doing. And when we look around and see teachers that are continually moving 100 miles an hour, they stop when they collapse because they get sick, or they are totally overwhelmed and stressed out. And I'm wondering if these intentional pauses, how can we help mentors and mentees for sure, but just all the listeners? We're all teachers. So we're all mentors, we're all novice teachers, whatever. How can we do that? So two ways that I'll share, and then I want to hear yours. So when I started writing the mentoring books, I knew I had to do what I called forced reflection. Every time I teach a workshop, there's forced reflection. We might do a half an hour and then it's like, okay, open your journals, write it down, process with a partner. And I had to keep coming up with these tools to force the reflection. Sometimes I was noticing random acts of reflection, like teachers will do it randomly, but it was never intentional or systematic. So one idea I came up with, which I called bubble sheets, which were very short, quick reflection prompts, like respond to this. I'm excited about this. I'm frustrated with X. I want to learn more about Y. This made me really upset today. I'd like to share X. I'm learning. So these prompts became these intentional ways that I would integrate into all my workshops, into all of my books, for people to stop on purpose and respond to something, even if it was one sentence. I noticed it broke the brain. It not broke the brain, it stopped the brain. It stopped the mind from moving ahead without thinking. The other thing that I did, and it actually we talk about in the next episode 8, is mindfulness and mentoring dilemmas, like using mindfulness practices to slow us down and take a dilemma and talk about it and reflect on how we might act when a student cheats in our class and we don't know what to do. We find out we think that student's cheating, but we don't want to, say we don't know what to do. That's what I call a dilemma. How do we reflect with a mentor or with a colleague or someone to do that? So I created those 2 tools to force the reflection. Reaction to this part of it, and then do you have tools that help you reflect or help your mentors reflect? Joe, what's your reaction?
As you started, Carol, I was thinking, like, I was really reflecting on what Laura said, right? Like, are we bringing in a certain bias about what this is?
Right.
Does a reflection have to be? This is where I was thinking as you were starting. So then now I'm gonna be the bad student. It's like, well, I think if we can acknowledge and like help people understand, like the reflection doesn't have to be right this completely systematic type thing. I think that helps us give us a little bit more permission to do things. I will tell you that like I've sent myself random emails with 1 or 2 sentence notes because I was like traveling from one gate to the other in the airport and I had an idea and I didn't want to lose it, right? Because if you don't write it down, it'll get lost. But now I find myself thinking about, well, what are the tools? How do I get myself to really get there? And I think a lot of that for me has been, a network of people that I trust and I know that I can learn from and engage in the conversations. When something comes up, who am I going to talk to? And so many kind of informal mentors in that. But then, if I think about the couple people that I could potentially think about as formal mentors, now in my life, there are regularly scheduled meetings, which again, if you're doing mentoring in school, is probably very common. But what I like about those, a lot of times we might have regularly scheduled meetings, but we don't have a regularly assigned, prescribed agenda. There isn't necessarily a certain thing we're trying to accomplish, but rather it's just knowing that somebody is there to help you. And again, they can be that up or the down. I gave the shout out to Deb Foster. I want to make sure I shout out Jesse Perez as my younger mentor. I'm gonna see him soon and I will pull him aside. We'll have the conversation again. We always do it every time we see each other, and he's still convinced that he has nothing to offer for me. And I'm sure Laura's run into that a lot, the mentors or mentees who feel they don't have anything to give. But I think just the permission that it can be both formal and informal, it can be structured and unstructured. Don't feel like you are reflecting wrong, I think would be a big thing for me. There
I
is
think
not a wrong way.
right, but what you said, there is an intentional meeting scheduled. That's what I'm getting at. That's a tool. So when you schedule it in, instead of what I have heard many times about either mentoring meetings or putting reflection in to get kind of have a authentic conversation, is that would be my son's first experience was the mentor said, when you need me, come to me. Well, that isn't helpful because a lot of people aren't going to come and say, I'm having a problem. A lot of beginning teachers are not going to do that, including him. So then they find the informal mentor in the form. So what I'm trying to get at is that intentionality that you put into this conversation. I don't want us to lose it. I think it's really important, whether it's a meeting with no agenda, it's still a meeting. And that's the intention. All right, Laura, weigh in. What do you think? We've got a lot going on here.
We do. We do. And Carol, you've mentioned, mindfulness, and intentionality is part of mindfulness, also awareness, which is where we're dropping into this present moment, and attitude. Those are the three parts of mindfulness. Attitude meaning kindness and care for ourselves. And to me, when it comes down to creating that ability to reflect, and Carol, you mentioned multiple times that very often we say, I'm too busy, I'm too overwhelmed. And what I've found, because I am a mindfulness teacher, a meditation teacher, a yoga teacher, is that what we really need in order to dive into reflection is courage. Because when we're running really hard and really fast, it's almost like there's a certain autopilot to it. And while, like you said, Carol, we can run really hard and really fast until we crash. But by taking those moments to say, like, I'm going to slow down, and that takes both courage and curiosity, where we're like, okay, whoa, whoa, whoa. And sometimes, one of the things we can do is create a habit. Like, it might be every night I'm going to have a journal next to my bed, and I'm going to say, what were the three best things that happened to me today? Or some of the prompts that you had, but building it in to our life in a way that, we remember to do it. That's really, important. And then when it's hard, just getting curious. Okay, why is this hard? What's going on here? Where's my resistance? And it might be because what we're shining a light on is making us maybe uncomfortable. And that can be, a beautiful space to be like, okay, well, who can I talk to about this? Are there mentors? Are there colleagues where I can say, I'm really struggling here? What do
Right.
you hear?
I like what I can't believe the time we're out of this conversation went by so quickly. We're out of time, but I want to close it up and have you each share what you're excited about. But I think it's important for that slow down and that recognition. And we do need help and we need to turn to other people. But I think I hear you each saying, let's celebrate too. Like we can have the prompts in our lives. Like, what am I most proud of? Joe's going to be the president of an organization that when he began teaching, he was a beginning teacher presenting at that same organization. And Laura, you have so many positive tendrils into many projects with your work. I want to keep the Seligman print, the PERMA, the positive psychology principles. We can reflect on that as well. We don't always have to be reflecting on what we need to do better. We need to reflect on what we're doing really well, which both of you are. So let's, as we wind down, Joe, what are you most excited about?
Man, I mean, there's just so much, and maybe that's all the self-reflection I've done through
Yes.
the years. I mean, the one thing I just want to make sure that I say, because I think it's really guided me, and I didn't have words for it for a really long time. I did basically a TED style talk a couple years ago now at NCSS, and in crafting it, they take you through, here's how you write it, where's your through line, where's your this, and somewhere in that process, I came up with a line that I've now used. I was finally like, it was the words to it. And I said, the greatest gift I've ever given myself is the courage to ask, right? Laura was just talking about courage. And what I go on to tell stories about is, I've reached out to a lot of people that I admire and, walk up to them. They don't know who I am, but I admire their work. And I'm willing to just ask, hey, can we talk? Can we work together? Can we learn together? Can we do something? And so the analogy I make throughout my that TED style talk is your teacher table. Who do you have at your teacher table that's there to celebrate with you, to help you through the stuff? Because the bigger the table, the more supports you're going to have, the more stuff there is. And I kind of close in the end, it's like, and don't, who are the people you look up to? Who are the people you think are doing a great job? Don't be afraid to ask them to come to your teacher table. And I think for me, that's that mentoring component of it. So many informal people in my life that I gave myself the gift of saying, hey, they might not answer. And people have, right? Like not every single person I've asked has that worked for. But I'm so just lucky and blessed and happy and grateful of the number of people in my life that at some point in time, I just said, hey, I would love to learn from you, with you, can we chat? And more people than you would ever think are always willing to say yes and give a part. And I think that's, again, my line is that's the greatest gift I've ever given myself is just that willingness. So that would be my parting advice to others out there. If there's anybody in your world that you think does a good job or you admire them, or there's anything about them that you want involved in your life, have the courage to just ask, right? It doesn't have to be a big ask. It doesn't have to be a formal mentoring thing or a scheduled time, but just be like, hey, can we talk? And I think you're going to find a lot of things open up in your life if you give yourself that gift.
Tell me just a snapshot of your new book that's out. What do people need to know about that?
Oh, sure. Well, I'll start with the mentoring part of it almost is when my first book was coming out, somebody that I had looked up to for a long time that I went up and said, hey, can we be friends? Reached out to me and said, hey, we should write a book together. And that was the origin story of that book. And it really, we call it the field guide, the 3 essential things that we think every social studies classroom should have. Students should be working with F, foundational evidence. They should have an I, inquiry approach to that evidence. And we can't ignore the E, the ed tech that's in our world today. We can't run from it. We can't hide from it. So if you have those 3 legs, the foundational evidence, inquiry, and ed tech, if you wrap it in learning design, because nobody has too much teaching time right now, there's just not enough time to teach. And so we think there's some really good quality structures in place to help teachers kind of find some of that time. So we put it together and called it the field guide for best practices like in social studies. And we think it's just a way to not only make teachers' lives easier and more efficient and get more out of it, but we really do think it positively impacts students. And I keep saying we, so I should give him the shout out as well. My co-author, Glenn Wiebe, again, I first saw him at NCSS, National Council, in 2014, went to his session, had seen him online, introduced myself afterwards, and here we are 11 years later, good friends, co-writing books together, because I went up and said, hey, can we be
Right. See
friends?
how
Can we talk? Yeah.
mentors make a difference. All right, Laura, you have the last word on this podcast. Share what you're most excited about and what our listeners need to know.
Oh, thanks, Carol. I appreciate it. So I've got 2 things to share. First is we've revised the programming we offer through Discovering My Purpose so that it's now peer-led. And what that means is that students are being trained in what life purpose is, how to help fellow students connect to their top strengths, uncover what they love to do, and explore how they feel the world should be a better place. The students then teach this these 4 one-hour sessions to their peers. And it's been so exciting and inspiring to watch the students step forward to take the lead in this way.
Can we put a link to your work? We'll put it in the notes so that the people listening can learn more about what this program is.
I would love that.
Okay, we can do that. We can do that. And what else would you like to share with us today?
Yeah, so the other thing I'd love to share is a meeting that I'll be speaking at this summer. It's called the Flourish Conference, and it's going to be held at Ridley College, August 20th through the 22nd in Southern Ontario. So the theme of the conference is well-being, which is well-being for teachers, well-being for students, and well-being for parents. So this is an educational conference, and conferences like this are effectively mini mentoring opportunities. So it perfectly aligns with what we talked about today. And it's also a chance for us to connect to our inner voice through learning and reflection. And on top of that, it's also set in the Niagara region, which is surrounded by vineyards. So it's another path to well-being, in my opinion, enjoying a glass of wine in a beautiful setting.
I love it. Well,
I
thank
know.
you.
So I hope that
Oh,
that listeners choose to attend.
I love that. We'll make sure that's in there. So I want to thank all our listeners for this dynamic conversation of mentoring and reflection, and I guess a reminder to listen to our inner voice. We know what to do. If we're running through the airport and we have a thought, we want to write it down. We do want to reflect. We want to have intentional meetings with our formal and informal mentors. We want to slow down, pause, and maybe the prompt for this podcast episode is, what's my big takeaway about how I can continue to reflect while I'm in action? And I like to end the podcast with an affirmation, usually for mentors and mentees, but I have one affirmation today, and that is, I am a reflective practitioner. Thank you all for listening, and we'll hope you tune in for episode 8, which is going to be more reflection about mentoring dilemmas and mindfulness. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone, for joining today's teacher-to-teacher conversation. We hope this time together energized you, inspired you, and reminded you why you chose to become a teacher. You can purchase any of Carol's books and any books mentioned in the podcast online at www.corwin.com. Please leave a review and share this podcast with your colleagues. Thank you for listening to the Corwin Teacher to Teacher podcast, a place to share teacher wisdom and engage in authentic conversations with experienced educators.
Come explore Corwin's free new teacher toolkit and resources. We've curated these resources based on extensive research from teachers, coaches, and principals alike. Whether you are brand new or a veteran teacher, find ready-to-go teaching tools at corwin.com today.